Book 1, The Dreaming City, which tells how Elric came back to Imrir, what he did there, and how, at last, his weird fell upon him. Book 1. What's the hour? The black-bearded man wrenched off his gilded helmet and flung it from him, careless of where it fell. He drew off his leathern gauntlets and moved closer to the roaring fire, letting the heat soak into his frozen bones. Midnight is long past, growled one of the other armoured men who gathered around the blaze. Are you still sure he'll come? Well, it's said he's a man of his word, if that comforts you. It was a tall, pale-faced youth who spoke. His thin lips formed the words and spat them out maliciously. He grinned a wolf grin and stared the new arrival in the eyes, mocking him. The newcomer turned away with a shrug. That's so. For all your irony, Yaris, he'll come. He spoke as a man does when he wishes to reassure himself. There were 6 men now around the fire. The 6th was Smjorgen, Count Smjorgen Baldhead of the Purple Towns. He was a short, stocky man of 50 years with a scarred face partially covered with a thick black growth of hair. His eyes smouldered morosely, and his lumpy fingers plucked nervously at his rich-hilted longsword. His pate was hairless, giving him his name, and over his ornate gilded armour hung a loose woolen cloak dyed purple. Smjorgen said thickly, he has no love for his cousin. He has become bitter. Urkun sits on the ruby throne in his place and has proclaimed him an outlaw and a traitor. Elric needs us if he would take his throne and his bride back. We can trust him. You're full of trust tonight, Count, Yaris smiled thinly. Rare thing to find in these troubled times. I say this. He paused and took a long breath, staring at his comrades, summing them up. His gaze flicked from lean-faced Darmit of Jarkor to Fadan of Lormir, who pursed his podgy lips and looked into the fire. Speak up, Yaris, petulantly urged the patrician-featured Vilmirian Naklon. Let's hear what you have to say, lad, if it's worth hearing. Yaris looked towards Jiku, the dandy, who yawned impolitely and scratched his long nose. Well, Smjorgen was impatient. What did you say, Yaris? I say we should start now and waste no more time waiting on Elric's pleasure. He's laughing at us in some tavern 100 miles from here, or else plotting that the dragon princes trap us. For years we've planned this raid. We have little time in which to strike. Our fleet is too big, too noticeable. Even if Elric has not betrayed us, then spies will soon be running eastwards to warn the dragons that there is a fleet massed against them. We stand to win a fantastic fortune, to vanquish the greatest merchant city in the world, to reap immeasurable riches, or horrible death at the hands of the dragon princes if we wait over long. Let's bide our time no more, and set sail before our prize hears of our plan and brings up reinforcements. You always were too ready to mistrust a man, Yaris. King Naklon of Vilmir spoke slowly, carefully, distastefully, eyeing the taut-featured youth. We could not reach Imrir without Elric's knowledge of the maze channels which lead us to its secret ports. If Elric will not join us, then our endeavour will be fruitless, hopeless. We need him. We must wait for him, or else give up our plans and return to our homelands. Well, at least I'm willing to take a risk, yelled Yaris, anger lancing from his slanting eyes. You're getting old, all of you. Treasure's not won by care and forethought, but by swift slaying and reckless attack. Fool. Darmit's voice rumbled around the fire-flooded hall. He laughed wearily. I spoke thus in my youth and lost a fine fleet soon after. Cunning and Elric's knowledge will win us Imrir. That, and the mightiest fleet to sail the sighing sea, since Melniboné's banners flooded over all the nations of the earth. Here we are, the most powerful sea lords in the world, masters, every one of us, of more than 100 swift vessels. Our names are feared and famous. Our fleets ravage the coasts of a score of lesser nations. We hold power. He clenched his great fist and shook it in Yaris's face. His tone became more level and he smiled viciously, glaring at the youth and choosing his words with precision. But all this is worthless, meaningless without the power which Elric has. That is the power of knowledge, of sorcery, if I must use that cursed word. His fathers knew of the maze which guards Imrir from sea attack, and his fathers passed that secret on to him. Imrir, the dreaming city. It dreams in peace, and will continue to do so unless we have a guide to help us steer a course through the treacherous waterways which lead to her harbours. We need Elric. We know it, and he knows it, and that's the truth. Well, such confidence, gentlemen, is warming to the heart. There was irony in the heavy voice which came from the entrance to the hall. The heads of the 6 Sea Lords jerked towards the doorway. Yaris's confidence fled from him as he met the eyes of Elric of Melniboné. They were old eyes and a fine-featured, youthful face, crimson eyes which stared into eternity. Yaris shuddered, turning his back on Elric, preferring to look into the bright glare of the fire. Elric smiled warmly at Count Schmjorgen, gripped his shoulder. There was a certain friendship between the two. He nodded condescendingly to the other 4 and walked with lithe grace towards the fire. Yaris stood aside and let him pass. Elric was tall, broad-shouldered and slim-hipped. He wore his long hair bunched and pinned at the nape of his neck, and for an obscure reason affected the dress of a southern barbarian. He had long knee-length boots of soft doe leather, a breastplate of strangely wrought silver, a jerkin of checkered blue and white linen, breeches of scarlet wool, and a cloak of rustling green velvet. At his hip rested his rune sword of black iron, the feared Stormbringer, forged of ancient and alien sorcery. His bizarre dress was tasteless and gaudy, did not match his sensitive face and long-fingered, almost delicate hands. Yet he flaunted it, since it emphasized the fact that he did not belong in any company, that he was an outsider and an outcast. But in reality he had little need to wear such outlandish gear, for his eyes and skin were enough to mark him. Elric, last lord of Melniboné, was a pure albino who drew his power from a secret and terrible source. Schmjorgen sighed. Well, Elric, when do we raid Imrir? Elric shrugged. As soon as you like, I care not. Give me a little time in which to do certain things. Tomorrow? Shall we sail tomorrow? Yaris said, hesitantly, conscious of the strange power dormant in the man he had earlier accused of treachery. Elric smiled, dismissing the youth's statement. 3 days' time, he said. 3 or more. 3 days? But Imri will be warned of our presence by then. Fat, cautious Fadan spoke. I'll see that your fleet's not found, Elric promised. I have to go to Imrir first, and return. Well, you won't do the journey in 3 days. The fastest ship could not make it, Schmjorgen gaped. I'll be in the dreaming city in less than a day, Elric said softly, with finality. Well, if you say so, I'll believe it, Schmjorgen shrugged. But why this necessity to visit the city ahead of the raid? Well, I have my own compunctions, Count Schmjorgen, but worry not, I shan't betray you. I'll lead the raid myself, be sure of that. His dead white face was lighted eerily by the fire, and his red eyes smouldered. One lean hand firmly gripped the hilt of his rune sword, and he appeared to breathe more heavily. Imrir fell in spirit 500 years ago. She will fall completely soon, forever. I have a little debt to settle. This is my only reason for aiding you. Well, as you know, I have made only a few conditions, that you raise the city to the ground, and a certain man and woman are not harmed. I refer to my cousin Erkun and his sister Cimmeral. Yaris's thin lips felt uncomfortably dry. Much of his blustering manner resulted from the early death of his father. The old Sea King had died, leaving young Yaris as the new ruler of his lands and his fleets. Yaris was not at all certain that he was capable of commanding such a vast kingdom, and tried to appear more confident than he actually felt. And now he said, "And how shall we hide the fleet, Lord Elric?" The Melnibonéan acknowledged the question. "I'll hide it for you," he promised. "I go now to do this, but make sure all of your men are off the ships first. Will you see to it, Smjorgen?" "Aye," rumbled the stocky count. He and Elric departed from the hall together, leaving 5 men behind. 5 men who sensed an air of icy doom hanging over the overheated hall. Oh, how could he hide such a mighty fleet when we, who know every fjord better than any, could find nowhere? Diarmid of Jacor had said bewilderedly. None answered him. They waited, tensed and nervous, while the fire flickered and died untended. Eventually, Smjorgen returned, stamping noisily on the boarded floor. There was a haunted gaze of fear surrounding him, an almost tangible aura, and he was shivering terribly. Tremendous racking undulations swept up his body and his breath came short. "Well, did Elric hide the fleet all at once? What did he do?" Diarmid spoke impatiently, choosing not to heed Smjorgen's ominous condition. "He's hidden it." That was all Smjorgen said, and his voice was thin, like that of a sick man, weak from fever. Yaris went to the entrance and tried to stare beyond the fjord slopes where many campfires burned. Tried to make out the outlines of ships' masts and rigging, but he could see nothing. "The night's too thick," he murmured. "I can't tell whether our ships are anchored in the fjord or not." Then he gasped involuntarily as a white face loomed out of the clinging fog. "Greetings, Lord Elric," he stuttered, noting the sweat on the Melnibonéan's strained features. Elric staggered past him into the hall. "Wine," he mumbled. "I've done what's needed and it has cost me hard." Diarmid fetched a jug of strong Cad Sandrian wine, and with a shaking hand poured some into a carved wooden goblet. Wordlessly he passed the cup to Elric, who quickly drained it. "Now I'll sleep," he said, stretching himself into a chair and wrapping his green cloak around him. He closed his disconcerting crimson eyes and fell into a slumber born of utter weariness. Fadan scurried down to the door, closed it, and pulled the heavy iron bar. None of the 6 slept much that night, and in the morning the door was unbarred and Elric was missing from the chair. When they went outside, the mist was so heavy they soon lost sight of one another, though scarcely 2 feet separated any of them. Elric stood with his legs astraddle on the shingle of the narrow beach. He looked back at the entrance to the fjord and saw with satisfaction that the mist was still thickening, though it lay only over the fjord itself, hiding the mighty fleet. Elsewhere the weather was clear, and overhead a pale winter sun shone sharply on the black rocks of the rugged cliffs which dominated the coastline. Ahead of him the sea rose and fell monotonously, like the chest of a sleeping water giant, grey and pure, glinting in the cold sunlight. Elric fingered the raised runes on the hilt of his black broadsword, and a steady north wind blew into the voluminous folds of his dark green cloak, swirling about his tall, lean frame. The albino felt fitter than he had done on the previous night, when he had expended all his strength in conjuring the mist. He was well versed in the art of nature wizardry, but he did not have the reserves of power which the sorcerer emperors of Melniboné had possessed when they had ruled the world. His ancestors had passed their knowledge down to him, but not their mystic vitality, and many of the spells and secrets that he had were unusable, since he did not have the reservoir of strength, either of soul or of body, to work them. But for all that, Elric knew of only one other man who matched his knowledge, his cousin Ercún. His hand gripped the hilt tighter as he thought of the cousin who had twice betrayed his trust, and he forced himself to concentrate on his present task, the speaking of spells to aid him on his voyage to the Isle of the Dragon Masters, whose only city, Imrir the Beautiful, was the object of the Sea Lord's massing. Drawn up on the beach, a tiny sailing boat lay, Elric's own small ship, sturdy and far stronger, far older than it appeared. The brooding sea flung surf around its timbers as the tide withdrew, and Elric realised that he had little time in which to work his helpful sorcery. His body tensed, and he blanked his conscious mind, summoning secrets from the dark depths of his soul. Swaying, his eyes staring unseeingly, his arms jerking out ahead of him and making unholy signs in the air, he began to speak in a sibilant monotone. Slowly the pitch of his voice rose, resembling the scarcely heard shriek of a distant gale as it comes closer. Then, quite suddenly, the voice rose higher until it was howling wildly to the skies, and the air began to tremble and quiver. Shadow shapes began slowly to form, and they were never still, but darted around Elric's body as, stiff-legged, he started forward towards his boat. His voice was inhuman as it howled insistently, summoning the wind elementals, the sylphs of the breeze, the Shanars, makers of gales, the Harshans, builders of whirlwinds, hazy and formless. They eddied around him as he summoned their aid with the alien words of his forefathers who had, ages before, made unthinkable pacts with the elementals in order to procure their services. Still stiff-limbed, Elric entered the boat, and like an automaton his fingers ran up the sail and set it. Then a great wave erupted out of the placid sea, rising higher and higher until it towered over the vessel. With a surging crash, the water smashed down on the boat, lifted it, and bore it out to sea. Sitting blank-eyed in the stern, Elric still crooned his hideous song of sorcery, as the spirits of the air plucked at the sail, and sent the boat flying over the water faster than any mortal ship could speed. And all the while, the deafening, unholy shriek of the released elementals filled the air about the boat as the shore vanished, and open sea was all that was visible.